So now we're going to talk about self-publishing. There was a time when self-publishing was the skid row of the publishing world. You only ended up there if you just couldn't hack it in the real publishing world. The vanity presses preyed on naive authors, soaking them of their savings without any real likelihood of publishing success. Self-published books were poorly designed, poorly printed, and handed out mostly to relatives, close colleagues, consignment shops, and reluctant but polite librarians. Sales were, at best, abysmal. Now, there are still unethical vanity presses out there, and you do need to watch out for them. These companies lure you into believing that they can handle all the work of self-publishing you, turn your book into a bestseller, and make you rich, if you will just give them a bunch of money up front. Beware of these leeches of the publishing world. Don't let too good to be true promises empty your savings account. But those ne'er-do-wells duly demonized. Self-publishing has, in recent years, become a far more respectable, sometimes even lucrative, alternative to traditional publishing. Self-publishing does not necessarily have to mean that you're offset printing a bunch of copies of your book, then selling them through bookstores. It could mean that. But it could mean that you're using a print-on-demand service, or publishing an ebook that you sell through online ebook retailers, or selling a downloadable PDF of your book through your own website. You have many, many options available to you, many of the same options used by traditional publishers. The difference with self-publishing is that you're making all the decisions, taking on all the financial risks, and earning all the profit. You will very likely contract out some of the work of publishing your book, something we'll talk about later. But fundamentally, if you self-publish, all the responsibility rests on you. Let's consider first some of the potential benefits of self-publishing. First of all, you're in charge. That means you get the final say on most of the decisions. You don't get to dictate to bookstores and online book retailers or tell book critics what to write, but most of the decisions about publishing your book are yours to make. Do you have a thing for Palatino font? You can decide to set your book in Palatino type. Have a weird title for your book, but you think it's the right choice? You make the call. That chapter in which you spend 100 pages describing how your main character cleans his fingernails. No one can make you cut it. And who knows, maybe scholars will one day gush about its postmodern brilliance. Second, you get a bigger cut of the purchase price. A much bigger cut, actually. With a traditional publisher, there are a lot of variables, but just to illustrate, you might expect to get around $3 of the purchase price of a hardcover, which probably sold for about $25. Or you might get around $1 of the purchase price of a $12 paperback. Now, if you're wondering, where does all the rest of the money go? There are some very good answers to that, and we'll touch on some of that later in this lecture. Even as a self-publisher, though, you won't receive the full retail price of your book unless you're selling it directly to readers with no intermediaries. But if you self-publish, you're probably going to make much more money per copy. Again, lots of variables, but maybe it will be $12 of that $25 purchase price, or $6 of that $12 purchase price. Third, you can potentially move faster. If your book is particularly timely, or if you hope to use it as a calling card for a career as a speaker or a consultant, you may want to have books in hand as soon as possible. The traditional publishing industry moves at a very deliberate pace. Some might call it ponderous. It's certainly not quick and nimble, unless extraordinary circumstances convince them that they absolutely must rush a particular book to market. Don't count on this happening for you. It's a very, very rare circumstance, and usually reserved for extremely famous people. With traditional publishing, a year and a half can easily pass between the time when your book is accepted by the publisher and when it hits the shelves. Now, if you're new to self-publishing, you'll be learning along the way, and this may slow you down. But you at least have the option of publishing the book much more quickly. You, after all, are probably only publishing one book, or a few at most. You can devote a lot of your time and your energy to getting it on the shelves. Traditional publishers may be working simultaneously on hundreds or thousands of titles. For them, rushing is usually inefficient. Finally, self-publishing can be a gateway to a traditional publishing contract later on. Maybe publishers aren't ready to take a risk on your book yet, with no evidence that it will sell well. So you decide to self-publish instead. If your book does well, you can go back to publishers with hard evidence that there's a demand for your book. At that point, you can negotiate a traditional publishing contract with the hope that the publisher can make of your book an even bigger success. Andy Weir's recent novel, The Martian, is a great example of this. Now, we don't know Weir, but we enjoyed his book. He published it first on his own website, free of charge. You had to read it in a web browser. There was no simple way to download it to your e-reader. The novel was very popular, and readers kept asking Weir to produce an ebook edition so they could have the convenience of reading it on their e-readers. So he did, and he charged a very nominal price for the book, 99 cents. Well, that ebook sold incredibly well, even though people could still read it for free on his website. Notice that this was a self-published ebook. Weir never produced any physical copies, unless perhaps he ran off a few copies on his home inkjet printer. The ebook did well enough that a literary agent contacted him, offered to represent him, and secured a publishing deal with Crown Publishing, a division of Penguin Random House. Crown published the book in hardcover, paperback, audiobook, and a somewhat less nominally priced ebook. The book is selling really well now, and Weir is presumably making a lot of money off of it. And there's a movie on the way. All of this from a very modest effort at self-publishing, only in electronic format, with no significant capital outlay up front. Another example is E.L. James's 50 Shades of Grey. Now, this book started out as fan fiction on an online discussion board for fans of Stephenie Meyer's Twilight trilogy. If the term fan fiction is unfamiliar to you, you might pause the lecture for a moment and go look it up. We won't try to define it here. But basically, James wrote a story, just for fun, set in the world Myers had created for the Twilight trilogy. She later moved it off the fan fiction board and to her own website, still offered for free. Later, she self-published the book as an ebook and a print-on-demand book. We'll talk more about that later. The book sold very well, and eventually Vintage Books, also a division of Penguin Random House, took notice and offered her a publishing contract. The film adaptation of the first book was recently released, and 50 Shades of Grey is on the short list of the most popular books ever written, with, of course, that much-talked-about movie version as well. Now, are you likely to have the kind of success that Weir and James have had? No, of course not. Nor are you likely to have that kind of success if you publish your book with a traditional publisher. Obviously, Weir and James are outliers. But what they prove is that you don't have to start out with a traditional publisher to be successful. It really is possible today for a self-published book to be successful, even perhaps wildly successful. Okay, so that's all very exciting, right? But yes, as you may have already guessed, there's a catch. Actually, there are several catches. First, you're responsible for all the work that traditional publishers would otherwise handle for you. And you're probably beginning to understand how much work that is. Traditional publishers would provide you with an editor and a proofreader, design your book, handle printing and other production, front any upfront capital costs, and handle marketing, sales, and distribution. It's a lot of work to take on yourself. Fortunately, as the self-publishing industry grows, it is becoming easier to contract out many of these services a la carte. You can hire your own editor, designer, and independent book publicist. You can use one of the many online self-publishing platforms to handle printing and distribution. You can sell through online book retailers. We'll get much deeper into the mechanics of all this in the follow-up course on self-publishing. But for now, know that you have a lot of work to coordinate as a self-publisher. But there are people and companies out there that can help you. The second catch is capital. Depending on the format in which you publish your book, your upfront capital costs may be minimal or quite substantial. A big batch of offset printed books is going to be expensive, and you have to come up with the money to pay for it long before you sell a single book. An editor, a designer, and a publicist are all going to cost money that you'll also have to pay before you sell a book. Traditional publishers front that money for you. Self-publishers, well, you're going to have to come up with it on your own. But there are many ways to keep your upfront costs low, such as starting out with print-on-demand or ebook-only production. The third catch is that as a self-publisher, you're simply not going to have the depth of expertise and the reach of a big traditional publisher. You may be a great writer. Maybe you'll also find you have a knack for marketing or design, but you're not going to equal the collective expertise of a well-established publisher's team of professional publishers. And you're not going to have the kind of access the big publishers get. The Barnes & Noble or Books A Million national buyers are not going to meet with you. They are going to meet with Penguin Random House's salespeople. You can, however, assemble a team of pros through independent contractors, many of whom formerly worked for traditional publishers before striking out on their own. You'll pay for their expertise, but if you can afford it, you can get it. And you do have the advantage of a laser focus on your book and only your book. The big 5 publishers have a lot of reach and power, but they're publishing thousands of titles, so yours isn't going to get the kind of individual attention that you'll give it if you self-publish. You're also probably able to move more nimbly to take advantage of unexpected opportunities. There are no committees or org charts to move each decision through. It's just you, and perhaps your contracted advisors. Finally, there's the catch of time. You can succeed as a self-publisher. The resources are out there, but there's no getting around that it will require more of your time than if you went with a traditional publisher. And that's time you're not spending writing your next book, or hanging out with your friends and family, or backpacking. Is it worth it to you? Giving up that time to be your own publisher? In the end, only you can answer that. Okay, so assignment time now. Go out and take a look at some of the major self-publishing platforms that are available to you. I'll name a few for you, but you can find more as well. You can look at Lulu, you can look at Publish America, you can go back to Amazon and look at KDP as well. These are all services that will provide you with the resources you need to self-publish successfully. So do a little bit of research, find some others that I haven't mentioned, find the ones that you think are well suited to you, and maybe share what you find on the discussion boards. Okay, so that's self-publishing. And with that, we've considered all the major options available to you for publishing your book. That's going to end part 1 of this course. In part 2, we'll start talking about the various formats in which you can publish your book. So take a break now, and we'll see you there.